Well, hey guys, and welcome to Sunday School TV. This morning we're continuing our look at the healings of Jesus that we started last week. And in this morning's story, we're going to find ourselves in Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. And this morning's story is pretty unique in this sense, in that we kind of get a 2-for-1 deal as we see Jesus heal a woman and then raise a young girl to life. And in looking at these stories, as we continue to look at these evidences of Jesus' healing, we're going to see continually, we're going to see two things. How Jesus meets not just a physical need, how he heals not just a physical need, but then how he shows those who he heals or the audience that's around their need for spiritual healing as well. And how the faith of those in response to the physical healing saves them in the spiritual sense as well. So in looking at this story, that's really going to be one of the main focuses for us this morning, as we see Jesus calls us to have faith in his ability to heal both the physical and the spiritual. So let's jump right in. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. When Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the sea. One of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, "My little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so that she can get well and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing against him. So let's pause right there real quick. So we got this man Jairus. He comes in faith, hearing about this man Jesus, who's healing people and who's done great things in his radical teachings. And he comes in faith and begs Jesus to come and heal his daughter and lay his hands on her. And so Jesus goes with him, and we see a large crowd following him to come and see. They're watching to see what he does, what teachings he presents. And so let's continue reading. Verse 25. Now a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing. For she said, "If I just touch his clothes, I'll be made well." Instantly, her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. So here we're going to see, here we see our first point in this morning's lesson is the physical healing of Jesus. That Jesus does provide physical healing to this woman, as the physical healing is not where he stops, though. And we'll see that as we continue the story. So this woman has suffered for many years much physical, emotional, social costs of her suffering from this disease. She's an outcast of the society because she's unclean, much like the lepers that we saw last week. And so this has completely changed the way she has to go about living her life. She spent all of her money trying to seek healing from doctors. And as we saw there in Scripture, she ended up actually worse because of what the doctors performed. And so she's just a total outcast of her society, and this has tremendously affected the way she has to live her life. And so the woman here understands shame. She understands shame the way probably nobody else does. So she's been shunned, she's impure, and the people on the streets probably turned from her. And in touching Jesus, she realizes that her only hope is in this man Jesus, who she's heard about, who she's heard heal. She's healed many other people. She's heard about his teaching. And so by faith, she makes her way through the crowd and touches his garment. So she's risking many things here, as if she's identified in the crowd, she's going to be cast out, called out, and possibly put to death. And she reaches out and touches him. And she's also risking this here because typically by touching Jesus, she should be making him unclean. But notice what happens is that when she touches him, actually the reverse happens, is that she doesn't make him unclean, but that her faith in reaching out and touching him he didn't make, her touch didn't make Jesus unclean, but instead, Jesus' power made her clean. So she didn't make him unclean, he made her clean. And so we see here, she didn't immediately, this happened immediately. She didn't stay as she was changed. And we saw this exchange of her uncleanliness for Jesus' purity, that Jesus provided that for her. And that's what the touch of faith grants us, that when we reach out in faith, Jesus moves. He acts in our life, and it makes us whole again. And Jesus wanted to heal. So let's continue reading and see how this story continues to develop. So we'll pick back up in verse 30. At once, Jesus realized in himself that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he was looking around to see who had done this. The woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." So here we see Jesus heal her, not just her physical need, but how he, on a deeper level, heals her spiritual need as he recognizes the faith that she has. Because notice how she not only reached out and touched him in faith, but she responded to his question in faith. Because under any other circumstance and any other person saying, "Who touched me?" And calling her out and her stepping forward and identifying herself would have resulted in her death, would have resulted in great harm to her. And so she's putting herself at the mercy of Jesus here. So she voluntarily steps forward after Jesus said, "Who touched me?" And she steps out, and Jesus recognizes her faith and says to her, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." So notice how he says, "Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." He's already healed her physical affliction. So now he has healed her spiritual affliction. And this is what Jesus does for all of us, is that he steps into the brokenness. He has stepped into the brokenness of this world, paid the penalty of our sin, and made a way for us to step out of our brokenness. So Jesus wanted to heal this woman deep within. He wanted to heal her shame. He wanted to heal her brokenness, not just her physical affliction, but her spiritual brokenness. So he turned to the people. He calls her out. She steps forward, and he welcomes her back in. He joins with her in community as she is now, her faith has saved her based on Jesus' purity, not on anything that she could accomplish. And so this is just a beautiful picture of the gospel. But remember how this story started, is that Jesus was on his way to heal this man's Jairus, to heal his daughter. And so he's stopped what he was doing, he's paused, and so let's pick back up with the story and see how Jesus reveals this same saving faith to Jairus and makes him aware of this same saving faith that this woman had. So we'll pick back up in verse 35. While he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue leader's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." So if you're familiar with the story, you know Jesus goes on to the house, and there's weeping and wailing. People have already begun the grieving process, and Jesus says, "Why are you making commotion and weeping?" And so people laugh at him and mock him for saying this, and he takes the father and mother. He goes in, and he raises the little girl to life. He says, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And so everybody's utterly astounded. And so this is a tremendous story here, but notice what I really want us to focus on is that verses 35 through 36, 35 and 36. So, at this point, I'm sure Jairus is just distraught as he came to Jesus distraught, and now he's had to wait even longer for Jesus to come heal his daughter because Jesus stopped to heal this unclean woman who I'm sure Jairus looked down upon. And so Jesus here uses this moment to calm Jairus, because people come and say, listen, your daughter's already passed away. Why even bother the teacher anymore? There's nothing that he can do about it. And so at this point is the phrase that I want to stick in our minds as we leave this lesson. Jesus hears this, and he looks to Jairus, and he says, don't be afraid, only believe. And so here we see Jairus continue to follow Jesus. Jairus came to Jesus in faith, similar to the woman, as she reached out to touch Jesus in faith. And so we kind of see how first the woman was healed of her physical need, and then her spiritual need was addressed. Well, here we see Jairus, as Jesus is addressing Jairus, he addresses the spiritual need and then addresses the physical need. And so here Jesus says, don't be afraid, only believe. And in reality, this is what all of us need to hear, especially in this season of the coronavirus and how it's interrupted our lives in many, many ways. Jesus knows that no matter what temporal healing he provides, no matter what temporal healing this life can provide, that everybody at some point faces death. All of us at any point, if we avoid the coronavirus, if we avoid cancer, if we live a healthy lifestyle and we make it to be 100 years old, no matter what, all of us are facing death at some point. And so Jesus, in these stories that we saw last week, that we've seen this morning, that we'll see in the weeks ahead, he is showing the people that any physical healing this world can provide, if we place all of our faith only in the things that this world can offer, we will ultimately still face death. But that the healing he provides is not just physical, but that he heals our brokenness to our core. He heals us so that we can be made right with him. The greatest healing of Jesus is not physical, it is eternal. And that's what he's revealing in these stories, and that's what he reveals to us in the gospel, is that biblical faith is more than trusting in Jesus for physical healing. Is that biblical faith is to trust in Jesus for resurrection healing, to trust in Jesus for the healing of our spiritual brokenness. I pray that this has been an encouraging lesson, a challenging lesson, and I look forward for us to discuss it later on tonight in our Zoom call. Go ahead, get signed up for camp if you haven't already. You can click the link in our bio on Instagram or go to the website. And I look forward to chatting with you guys soon. But until then, don't be afraid, only